Okay, hi everyone, this is Mark from Excalibur. I'm just going to be making a quick tutorial today about the ship weathering textures and how those are made as quickly as possible really, and the different stages that I'm following to do them. This is primarily for the artists within the team, but this is going to go up on YouTube for everyone to see. So if you're just curious about what we're doing and the way that we're doing it, then you're more than welcome to have a look. Okay, so we're starting off on Autodesk 3D Studio Max 2009. You can use 2010, 2011, you can use Maya, Lightwave, whatever it is that you want to use. All we're doing is opening a model and exporting it to OBJ. But just quickly to show you the settings that we need to use, I'm going to be using the Norway class as an example, and what I've done is I've set up the Norway class so that we've got two textures within a single material, saucer and wings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Export, and I'm going to export that to Norway.obj. And what's important here is that you set up the material so that you are using the material, is what it's called on this exporter, but basically so you're creating references for the material, but you're not actually creating a material library. We don't want the materials themselves, we just want the knowledge that the materials exist. And you'll see why that's important in a little bit, and it'll make a bit more sense to you when you do see. Okay, so I've exported that now and I've switched over to Photoshop CS5 Extended. You're going to need to have CS4 or CS5, and it's going to have to be the extended version to do what we're doing here, because the other versions don't support 3D painting in the same way. So if we go File, New, what I want to do is just create a document that's going to fit on my screen. So you can see that there's no kind of gaps anywhere. I'm not at 66%, or I'm not having to zoom out to see all of this. It's just kind of roughly fitting my window. Now the reason why I want to do that is because I'm not actually making a document here. I'm using this almost like a viewport, and I want to see what my model's doing. But equally, I don't want to have too much space, because that'll probably be a little bit harder on my hardware. So try and get it about right. And we're going to go 3D, new layer from 3D file, and then I'm going to import Norway.obj, which I exported just a second ago. And when I do that, you can see that it brings it in with a nice white chalky texture on it. But the reason why we had to set up the materials earlier on so that they were referenced but they weren't actually exported was this. When we imported the OBJ, Photoshop also picked up that I have a multi-texture, wings and saucer. And what it'll allow me to do now is double click on one of those, which I'll do in a second, and edit them. And I can apply multiple textures to the same object because of that. Now if you've got a single texture mesh, it's not such a big deal, you can get around it, but definitely for multi-texture you have to set up the OBJ properly. Okay, like I said, in a minute I'm going to have a look at these. Just first of all, just to show you how to get around in this view, I'll move that back out for a second. This button here is 3D object. This button here is just 3D. And you'll notice that it's got all the same tools: rotate, roll, pan, slide, scale, and they appear in both of them pretty much. They're called slightly different things. However, this button basically allows you to rotate around the object, whereas this button allows you to rotate kind of a bit more freely around a point that you choose. So I tend to use this one here for panning, so that's the white arrow tool, and then this one underneath it I use to bring the object closer to the camera or further away. I'll put it about there. And finally this one here I can use to rotate the object around and move the camera around the object, depending on which way you want to look at it. If I get into a situation where I want to roll the object, I can also use this one. Okay, so what I need to do now is bring in the textures for my wings and for my saucer. So if I double click on this, you'll notice that it starts off by default at 1024 by 1024. Now the textures on this ship at the moment are 2048 by 2048. So I'm going to increase that size and then simply drag in my texture And the reason why I'm doing this is just so that I've got some idea, some reference of how the textures look on the object. And it means that for for details which are only in the textures, I can include dirt onto those, that type of thing. The other thing that I need to do is click New Layer. And the reason why I do that is because when I thank you very much. When I draw onto this texture, if I don't have a new layer set up, it will just draw straight onto the background layer, and I won't be able to manipulate those separately later on, and I won't be able to use them as a weathering map either. So this is going to be kind of rough directional, let's call it that. Okay, and if I go File, Save, close this back down, you'll notice when I go back in, I've got textures on my wings and on my nacelles. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing again on Saucer, and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so I've set up the textures on both of the materials, and I've now switched over to my brush tool. And what I'm using here is a pack called Blur's Good Brush Pack. You can find it on the web really easily, and for those of you who are in the team, that's on the reference page that I set up for you. And within that pack, I'm using Splash 2 just to kind of get started. Now, you'll notice it's a pretty big brush, and if I kind of splodge that on the front, it should, yeah, there you go, should create quite an impact. But what we actually want to use this for is initially just quite small along the rim. And the reason why is, if I drag that, you can see that it creates lots and lots of splodges. Now, the effect that that kind of has is that it looks a little bit like you've had big bits of debris and dirt and dust and soot that have hit the front of the ship in a particular way. Now, the challenge is to kind of try and make that look a bit more realistic. So the one thing we need to do is make it so that the flow is quite low. Obviously, it shouldn't be that dark straight away. There we go, a little bit more like that. Maybe just a touch higher. And then we can start drawing. Now, I'm using a graphics tablet here, but it doesn't really matter too much whether you're using a graphics tablet or a mouse. The one thing to keep in mind is just be aware of where you're drawing, because although you may be looking at one particular bit of the hull, it's easy to catch the wrong bit in the background. So for instance, if I was drawing here, then I would find that it appeared on the blue as well as on the main hull. Okay.